Clara Whitmore drove the fireplace poker into the locked door with both hands and screamed, "Open this door right now, or I burn this house to the ground with you in it!" Behind her, Eliza pressed Nora against the far wall. Snow hammered every window. The blizzard had sealed every road out of Montana for 3 days running. Caleb Hargrove came up those stairs 2 at a time, grabbed Clara's wrist before she could swing again, and said in a voice like gravel and iron, "You don't know what's behind that door." Clara looked him straight in the eye. "Then tell me, because whatever it is, it's been screaming my daughter's name for the last hour." Before we go back to where this story truly began, if you're new here, please subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss a story. Drop your city in the comments right now. I want to see how far this story travels. Every single comment means everything to me. Now let's go back. 4 days earlier, the train pulled into Mill Haven Station on the 2nd of December, 1882, running 4 hours late through a blizzard that had turned the Montana sky into a solid white wall. Clara Whitmore stepped onto the platform with Eliza on her left and Nora on her right, and a single carpet bag that held everything the 3 of them owned in the world. The wind came down off the mountains and hit them like a fist. Nora gasped. "Mama." "I know. It's colder than Ohio cold." "Much colder." Clara scanned the platform. 6 people, all of them moving fast toward warmth. No sign with her name. No welcoming face. No Caleb Hargrove. "Stay close." Eliza moved half a step behind her and to the right. She'd been doing that since October, positioning herself where she could move fast if she needed to. 13 years old, and already she stood the way soldiers stood. Clara hated that. Hated what the last 14 months had done to her daughter's body. The way it had replaced childhood with something watchful and coiled. "He ain't coming," Eliza said. "He'll send someone." "How do you know?" Clara didn't answer because Eliza already knew the answer. She didn't know. She had exchanged 11 letters with Caleb Hargrove over 4 months. 3 paragraphs each, careful handwriting. No declarations, no warmth, no false promises. The last letter said, "I will arrange transport from the station." That was all. She had told herself that efficiency meant reliability. She had not let herself think too hard about what else efficiency might mean. A wagon rolled around the corner of the station building. Big gray horse, heavy-set, unbothered by the cold. The driver was old, past 70, with a beard the color of dirty snow, and eyes that moved over Clara and her daughters with an expression she couldn't name. He pulled to a stop and did not climb down and did not tip his hat. "You the Whitmore woman?" "I am, Clara Whitmore. These are my daughters, Eliza and Nora." He looked at the girls for a long moment. His jaw shifted. "Hargrove said 1 woman." "He has 3 now," Clara said. "Is that going to be a problem?" He chewed the inside of his cheek. "Ain't my problem to have. Name's Ezra. Get in the back. Got blankets. You're gonna need 'em." Clara helped Nora up first, then Eliza. She climbed in herself and tucked both girls under the wool blankets. The wagon smelled of horses and pine resin, and something faintly chemical underneath that she couldn't place but filed away. "How far is the ranch, Ezra?" 9 miles. "How long in this weather?" "Long enough." He clucked to the horse, and they moved off into the white. "Keep the little one wrapped. Wind's got teeth tonight." They rode in silence for a mile. Nora fell asleep against Clara's shoulder almost immediately. Eliza stayed awake. She always stayed awake. "Mama," Eliza said, low enough that only Clara could hear. "You read his letters twice before you answered each one." "I did. Did he sound like a good man? Clara thought about the letters, the absence of anything warm or false in them. He sounded like an honest man, she said. That's worth more than good right now. Eliza was quiet. Then, Papa was honest. Yes. Honest didn't save him. Clara pulled her daughter closer and said nothing, because there was nothing to say to that. It was true. Daniel Whitmore had been the most honest man she'd ever known, and it had cost him everything, and then reached past him and taken everything from them, too. The bankmen with their papers, the lawyer with his smooth voice and his documents that somehow, impossibly, bore Daniel's signature, agreeing to debts he had never spoken of. The constables asking questions she couldn't answer. The neighbors who stopped meeting her eyes. She had not cried at Daniel's coffin. She had been too busy counting what she had left. 2 daughters, a carpetbag, a name that wasn't yet ruined. That was all she had taken west. Ezra spoke without turning around, somewhere past the halfway mark. There's something you ought to know before we get there. Then say it. Hargrove's a private man. Don't like questions. Don't like people going where they ain't been invited. He paused. There's a room on the 2nd floor, end of the hall. Door's always bolted. You don't knock on it. You don't ask about it. You keep your girls away from that end of the hall. Another pause, longer. Especially the little one. Clara felt the cold shift from weather into something else. Why especially her? Ezra said nothing. Ezra, why especially the little one? Curious age, he said finally. Kids that age go looking for things they can't unlearn. He said nothing more after that. Not one word for the rest of the 9 miles. The ranch house appeared through the snow as the last gray light failed. 2 stories, dark timber, steep roof already loaded with 2 feet of white. Lights in 2 windows downstairs. The outbuildings were well maintained, the fences straight, the firewood stacked high and neat against the south wall. Everything tended, everything orderly. Clara noticed that, and made herself notice it, because it told her something useful about the man inside. Ezra set her bag on the porch steps without ceremony, climbed back up to the wagon seat, and looked at her one last time. Keep your head down, Mrs. Whitmore, he said. Don't ask questions you ain't prepared to hear answered. He gathered the reins. And lock your door tonight. Every night. Then he drove away into the dark, and the 3 of them were alone on a stranger's porch in a Montana blizzard. Nora took Clara's hand with both of hers. Is this home now? For now, Clara said. She knocked. The door opened almost immediately, as though he had been standing just behind it. Caleb Hargrove was taller than she had imagined. He filled the doorframe without effort, the way men fill doorframes who have spent years doing hard physical work without once thinking about it. Perhaps 45, dark hair going gray at the temples, a face that had been handsome once and was now something more severe and more interesting. Lines around the eyes cut deep, a mouth set in a straight line that looked like it had forgotten easier expressions. He looked at Clara. He looked at Eliza. He looked at Nora. He showed nothing. Mr. Hargrove, I'm Clara Whitmore. I know who you are. Deep voice, even, no inflection up or down. My letter said 1 woman. It did. I wrote in my 3rd letter that I have 2 daughters. Something moved behind his eyes. Not anger. Something more careful than anger. More controlled. He stepped back from the door. Come in. The kitchen was warm, coffee on the stove, and something else, venison by the smell of it. The table was plain oak, the chairs solid. Everything in the room functional and tended, and without a single decoration, except for one photograph nailed above the stove. A woman, perhaps 50, with Caleb's jaw and lighter eyes. Not smiling. Looking at the camera the way you look at something you haven't quite figured out. Caleb set 3 cups on the table and poured coffee. He reached for a 4th cup, held it for a half second, then put it back in the cabinet. He did it without thinking. The way you reach for something out of pure muscle memory before your mind catches up and reminds you. Clara filed that away. "Sit," he said. They sat. Nora wrapped both small hands around the cup for the warmth and looked up. "Thank you, mister." Caleb looked at her, just for a moment. Something moved through his face, like weather passing. "You're welcome," he said, and it came out like a word he was working to remember how to use. "Mr. Hargrove," Clara said, "I want to address my daughters directly and get it settled." "Go ahead." "They go where I go. That is not negotiable. If your arrangement requires a woman alone, tell me now, tonight, and I'll arrange to leave in the morning." Caleb put both hands flat on the table and looked at her. "You came 9 miles in a blizzard to negotiate?" "I came 9 miles in a blizzard because I had nothing left to lose. But I will walk back out into it tonight before I put my girls somewhere they're not wanted." Eliza made a small sound beside her. Clara didn't move her eyes off Caleb. He was quiet for 5 full seconds. Then he stood, went to the cabinet, and came back with 2 more plates. He set them in front of Eliza and Nora. He had already made food for 4. He had made it before they arrived. He set the plates down and sat back across from Clara as if none of that required comment. "Same terms," he said. "Contract stands as written. 1 woman or 3. The work gets done either way." "Why?" Eliza asked. Caleb looked at her directly. Most adults flinched a little when Eliza spoke like that. He didn't. "Because your mother does the work, not you." He paused 1 beat. "Though I expect you're useful." Eliza studied him the way she studied everything. "I am," she said. Something crossed Caleb's face that was not quite a smile, but lived in the same county. He slid a document across the table. Several pages, clear script, the kind of handwriting that meant a man who thought before he put pen to paper. Clara read it twice, slowly, the way she had read his letters. Room and board for herself and dependents, $12 monthly, 2 years minimum. She would manage the house, keep accounts, cook, and assist with ranch administration. She was not to leave the property without informing him. She was not to receive visitors without his knowledge. And at the bottom of the 2nd page, Article 7, she shall not access or make inquiry regarding the 2nd floor room at the end of the hall under any circumstances whatsoever. Violation of this article constitutes immediate termination of this contract. Article 7, Clara said. Yes. There is a bolted room in this house, and you want me to sign a contract promising never to ask about it? Correct. That is not something I can agree to blindly, Mr. Hargrove. Then don't sign. I have 2 children. I'm aware of that. His voice did not rise. It never rose, she would come to understand. Caleb Hargrove's voice was the same at a whisper as at full volume, and that evenness was not calm. It was control. Mrs. Whitmore, you are exhausted. Your daughters are exhausted. There is food on the table and a warm room upstairs. I am asking nothing from you tonight except that you eat and sleep. He held her gaze. The room at the end of the hall is my sister. Her name is Ruth. She is ill, and she requires quiet and privacy. That is all I am prepared to say on the subject. What kind of illness? the kind covered by Article 7. Mr. Hargrove, sign it or don't. He slid the pen across. 5 minutes. Clara looked at the pen. She looked at her daughters. Nora's eyes were drooping over the food. Eliza was watching Caleb with that puzzled expression. Not afraid, just calculating. Clara thought about the road behind them, buried under 2 feet of Montana snow. She thought about the bankman and the lawyer and the warrant with Daniel's name on the debt documents. She thought about Nora asking, "Is this home now?" She signed. Caleb took the document, folded it precisely, placed it in his vest pocket. "Your room is at the top of the stairs, first door on the left, big enough for 3. He stood and began clearing space on the stove. "Eat. I'll bring an extra mattress down from storage." He was gone before she could respond. They ate in silence. The stew was plain and good. The coffee was strong and hot. Nora finished half her bowl and fell asleep sitting up, and Eliza quietly ate what her sister had left, without a word, without looking up, and Clara watched her do it and felt something in her chest that had no name. She had watched Eliza do that for 14 months, since the funeral, since the emptied house, since the long, cold months of nothing. When Caleb came back, he glanced at the plates and nodded once. He carried Nora upstairs himself, one arm, easy and careful, the way a man handles something he recognizes as fragile. Clara followed with Eliza. The room was plain and clean. 2 beds made up tight, an extra mattress on the floor, already covered with a quilt that smelled of cedar and lye soap. A window facing north, frosted at the edges. A hook on the back of the door for coats. Caleb laid Nora down and stepped back toward the door. "Hall lamp stays lit all night," he said to Clara. "You need anything before morning, knock on the door at the far end of the landing. My room." He stopped, corrected himself without seeming to realize he was doing it. "The door on the right, at the far end." "Not the left," Eliza said, conversational, perfectly innocent sounding. Clara knew better. Caleb looked at her for a long moment. "That's right," he said. "Not the left." He looked at Clara. "Good night, Mrs. Whitmore." "Good night, Mr. Hargrove." His footsteps went down the hall, paused at the far end. Just a breath of a pause, the sound of a hand on a bolt, checking it was set. And then his door opened and closed. Eliza was at the crack of their door before his latch clicked. "There's a sound," she said, very quiet. "From down the hall. Low. Like someone moving back and forth. Steady." She turned to Clara. "It's been going the whole time we've been up here." "Eliza, bed." "Mama." "Bed. Boots off." Eliza came away from the door. She lay down, and Clara took off her boots for her, the way she had when Eliza was Nora's age. And by the time she pulled the quilt up, Eliza's eyes were closed. But her breathing never evened the way Nora's did. Eliza hadn't fully slept since October. Clara knew the difference. She turned down the lamp and lay on the floor mattress and listened to the blizzard work at the north wall. The house settled. The stove cooled and ticked. Nora breathed deep and steady. And then, beneath all of it, Clara heard the sound Eliza had described. Low, rhythmic, from down the hall past the bolt. Not floorboards, not wind. A voice, barely more than a murmur, rising and falling, like someone talking through a dream. Or praying. Or reciting the same words over and over to keep from going somewhere darker. Clara lay still and listened. It went on for perhaps 10 minutes. Then it stopped. The silence it left behind was heavier than the sound had been. She did not sleep. Morning came gray and brutal. Clara was downstairs before the girls woke to find Caleb already at the stove, salt pork in the iron skillet, coffee boiling. He didn't look up when she came in, poured her a cup, and set it at the table without being asked. They were quiet for a moment. The pork sizzled. Snow hit the window. "I heard something in the night," Clara said. His hands on the skillet handle did not still, but something in his shoulders changed by one small degree. "Old houses make noise," he said. It wasn't the house. It was a voice. She wrapped both hands around her cup. A woman's voice. He turned from the stove and looked at her directly. "You are in an unfamiliar place, in a blizzard, after a long journey, with 2 children," he said. "Your mind manufactures. My mind does not manufacture things, Mr. Hargrove. I have been too tired for imagination for the better part of a year." She met his eyes. "I am telling you what I heard. I am not asking a question. Article 7 covers questions." Something moved in his jaw. A muscle. Just once. "That distinction is not going to serve you well here." "It serves me fine." They looked at each other across the kitchen. The pork began to smoke. He turned back to tend it. "Ruth has difficult nights sometimes," he said to the wall. "She calls out. It means nothing. It is managed." He plated the food and set it on the table and sat. "I am telling you this so you are not alarmed if you hear it again. That is the full extent of what I will say." "Does she have a doctor?" "She is managed," he said again, flat. The sentence ended like a door closing. Clara ate her breakfast slowly and thought about the word managed, about the 4th cup he had reached for and put back, about the pause in the hallway where his hand had checked the bolt, about the way Ezra had said, "Keep the little one away from that end of the hall," and then refused to explain why. Managed was not the same word as cared for. Clara knew that distinction too. When Eliza came downstairs and looked at her across the table, with that question in her eyes, Clara gave the smallest shake of her head. Not yet. Nora arrived last, boots on the wrong feet, hair loose, and went straight to the window and pressed her nose flat against the glass. "It's still snowing. Is it going to snow forever?" "Not forever," Caleb said, washing dishes with his back to the room. "Stops by January, usually." "That's a long time." Nora turned and studied him with the clear, fearless curiosity of a 7-year-old who had not yet learned that staring at people was rude. "Do you got kids?" "Nora," Clara said. "It's a normal question," Nora said reasonably. Caleb set down the dish he was washing. He turned around and looked at Nora for a moment with an expression Clara could not read at all. "No," he said. He turned back. "I don't." "Did you want him?" "Nora." Clara's voice was firmer. "It's all right." Caleb's voice was quiet. He still had his back to the room. "Yes," he said. "I did. Long time ago." He picked the dish back up and didn't say anything more. Nora nodded like that answer was sufficient and went back to watching the snow. Eliza caught Clara's eye and raised one eyebrow by a fraction of an inch. Clara kept her face still. She was thinking about the 4th cup again. About a man who had made food for 4 before they arrived. About the way he had said a long time ago, like it was a door he had locked himself. At midday, Clara went upstairs to bring fresh water from the hall pitcher to their room. The hallway was quiet. She walked past the linen cupboard, past the place where the hall turned, and stopped. The bolt was there, exactly as he had said, heavy iron set into the doorframe. Below it, a padlock the size of her fist. And from behind the door, completely clear in the daytime quiet of the house, a woman's voice. "Please, is someone there? Please, I can hear you walking." Clara's hand tightened on the pitcher handle. "Please," the voice said again. Thin, frayed at the edges, the way voices get when they have been asking the same thing for a very long time, with no answer. "Tell him I'll be quiet. Tell him I won't say anything. Just please let me out. Please. It's so cold in here. I can't get warm. Please." Clara stood in the hall, with the water pitcher going cold in her hands and the blizzard pressing against every window, and the road to Millhaven buried under 3 feet of snow. And she thought with perfect clarity about the contract in Caleb Hargrove's vest pocket, about her daughters downstairs, about the fact that Ezra was the only other human being within 9 miles, and Ezra had driven away without looking back. She thought about all of that. Then she stepped forward and put her palm flat against the door and said quietly, "I hear you." A sharp breath from the other side. Silence. Then, barely a sound at all. "Don't let him know you came, please. He'll move me somewhere I can't be found. Just come back. Come back when he's away from the house, and I'll tell you everything. Everything he did. Everything he's still doing. Please, please just come back." Footsteps on the stairs. Heavy, measured, one at a time. Clara stepped back from the door, turned, walked to the linen cupboard, opened it, and made a careful production of searching the shelves with her back to the hall, her hands perfectly steady, her heart slamming against her ribs hard enough to bruise from the inside. Caleb appeared at the top of the stairs. He looked at her. He looked at the cupboard. He looked at the closed door at the end of the hall. He said nothing for a long moment. "Needed extra towels," Clara said, even, steady. The voice she had used on the bankmen and the constables and every other person who had looked at her like she had nothing left to bargain with. Caleb walked toward her slowly. He stopped 2 feet away, close enough that she could see the muscle working in his jaw again. He looked at the shelves over her shoulder. "Third shelf," he said. "Folded on the 3rd shelf." "Thank you." She took the towels. She turned and walked back toward the stairs. He did not move to let her pass easily. She went around him without touching him, and went down the stairs without hurrying. Behind her, she heard him stand in the hall, still, for a long moment. And then the small, quiet sound of his hand on that bolt, testing it, checking that it held. It held. Clara walked to the kitchen window and stood with the towels in her arms and looked at the snow filling every direction away from this place. She thought about the voice behind the door. "The cold in here," the woman had said. "I can't get warm." She thought about the contract. About 2 years minimum, about $12 monthly, about managed. She thought about her daughters, about Nora's boots on the wrong feet and Eliza eating her sister's food without a word, about everything she had crossed half the country to give them. Clara set the towels on the counter. She exhaled once, slow and controlled. She was going to need that key. That afternoon, Clara moved through the house the way she had learned to move through difficult situations, quietly, methodically, giving nothing away on the surface while her mind worked at the problem underneath. She swept the kitchen floor. She mended a split seam on Nora's coat. She made a mental inventory of every room she had been in, every door she had passed, every drawer and cabinet she had seen Caleb open. She was looking for the shape of the key, not the key itself, not yet. The shape of where a man like Caleb Hargrove would keep something he needed close, but not visible. He was not a careless man. She had established that within the first hour of being in his house. Everything in its place. Everything tended. A man who kept order like that did not leave important things in obvious places. But he also did not hide them so well that he'd have to hunt for them in an emergency. The key was on him or near him. Belt, vest pocket, or bedside table. Those were the 3 most likely places, and 2 of them she couldn't get to without him knowing. She needed him to trust her first. That was the only way. The problem was that Caleb Hargrove did not appear to be a man who trusted anyone. He came in from the barn at 4 in the afternoon, stamping snow off his boots in the doorway, and found Clara at the stove, starting supper. He stopped for just a moment when he saw her there, the way you stop when something is where you didn't expect it to be. And then he came in and hung his coat and sat at the table. "Beans and cornbread," Clara said, without turning around. "Is that acceptable?" "It's fine." "There's coffee if you want it." "Thank you." She heard him pour his own cup and sit back down. She kept her back to him and stirred the beans and waited. "You found everything you needed?" he asked. "The kitchen is well organized, easy to learn." A pause. "Ruth organized it," he said, "years ago." Clara turned around at that because she understood it was the kind of thing a person said without meaning to. The kind of sentence that escaped when a man's guard dropped by one small degree. She looked at him across the kitchen. He was looking at his coffee cup. "She kept a good house," Clara said carefully. "She did." He didn't look up. "Before." Clara turned back to the stove. She filed the word "before" away with the fourth cup, and the bolt, and the pause in the hallway. Before was a door he had left ajar without realizing it. Eliza came in from upstairs while Clara was setting the table, and Nora came in right behind her with a stick of firewood she had apparently decided to carry in from the porch on her own initiative. She set it down beside the stove with an expression of great satisfaction and looked at Caleb. "I helped," she announced. "I can see that," Caleb said. "You're welcome." Something shifted in Caleb's face again, that almost smile that lived at the edges of his expression without ever fully arriving. Eliza noticed it. Clara noticed Eliza noticing it. They ate supper the way they had eaten breakfast, mostly in silence. But it was a different silence than the mornings. The morning silence had been the silence of strangers taking the measure of each other. This one had slightly more give in it. Nora filled most of the space anyway, asking Caleb how deep the snow got, whether the horses had names, whether he had ever seen a wolf, and whether wolves ever came close enough to the house to hear at night. Caleb answered every question with the same economy he brought to everything. 1 or 2 sentences, factual, no embellishment, but he answered. He didn't dismiss her or redirect her to her mother. Clara noted that too. After supper, while Clara was washing dishes, Eliza appeared at her elbow. "I went to the end of the hall," Eliza said, very quiet, the words so low they barely made sound. Clara's hands stilled in the wash basin. She did not turn her head. "I told you to stay away from there." "I know." "Eliza." "She was crying, Mama." Eliza's voice was completely flat, the way her voice went when she was most frightened and most determined not to show it. "Not loud, just crying, like she'd been doing it so long she couldn't stop even when she wanted to." Clara breathed in slowly, out slowly. "Did she hear you?" "I don't think so. I didn't touch the door." A pause. "There's frost on the inside of the door. I could see it in the gap at the bottom. The room isn't heated, Mama." Clara looked at the window above the sink. The glass was fog from the warmth of the kitchen, and beyond it was nothing but dark and white and wind. It was 12 degrees outside, maybe less. She thought about what an unheated room felt like on the second floor of a timber house in a Montana blizzard, and she felt something cold move through her that had nothing to do with the weather. "Go sit with Nora," Clara said. "I want to—" "Eliza, please." Eliza went. Clara finished the dishes and dried her hands and stood at the window for another minute. Then she went to find Caleb. He was in the front room, going over the ranch accounts at a writing desk, a lamp pulled close, his reading glasses low on his nose. She hadn't known he wore reading glasses. It made him look different. Not softer exactly, but more complete somehow. more like a man and less like a function. "Mr. Hargrove," she said from the doorway, "I need to speak with you about something." He looked up over the glasses. "Sit down." Clara sat in the chair across from the desk and folded her hands in her lap and looked at him directly. "The room at the end of the hall is not heated." He said nothing. "It is below freezing outside. The room has no heat source." She kept her voice even. "Regardless of the terms of Article 7, that is a matter of basic human welfare that I cannot in good conscience ignore." "The room has a coal stove," Caleb said. "It is managed." "I was told this morning that it is cold enough in that room to frost the inside of the door." A pause. "Who told you that?" Clara held his gaze. "I heard it." He took off the reading glasses and set them on the desk. He put both hands flat on the papers in front of him, a gesture she was beginning to recognize as the thing his hands did when he was weighing something. "I'll check the stove," he said. "I'd like to come with you." "No." "Mr. Hargrove." "No, Mrs. Whitmore." Not raised, never raised, but the word landed like something set down from a great height. "I understand your concern. I will address it. You have my word." He looked at her steadily. "That will have to be sufficient." "Your word is going to have to earn itself," Clara said. "I signed your contract 4 hours ago. I don't know you well enough yet to take your word as sufficient for a woman locked in a cold room." The muscle in his jaw moved. "She is not in danger." "She is cold." "I said I'll check the stove." "Tonight." "Yes," he said, and the word was clipped and flat, and meant both yes and also stop pushing. "Tonight, before I sleep." He picked up his reading glasses. "Is there anything else?" Clara stood. "Not tonight," she said. She went upstairs and lay awake listening for his footsteps going down the hall. And at 10:30, she heard them. Heard the sound of the bolt being drawn back, the brief creak of a door, muffled voices, one low and even, one thin and high. Then the door again, the bolt, his footsteps back to his own room. She told herself the stove was fixed. She told herself Ruth was warmer now. She told herself to think clearly and not to move too fast, because moving too fast would get all 3 of them sent back into the blizzard with nowhere to go. She was still telling herself that when she finally slept. 3 days passed. They settled into a routine, the way people settle into routines in confined spaces, not by choice, but by the logic of proximity and repetition. Clara cooked and cleaned and kept the accounts with a precision that she could tell surprised Caleb, though he said nothing about it. Eliza split firewood in the mornings and mended tack in the afternoons. And by the 3rd day, Caleb had started directing small tasks at her without going through Clara first, which was the closest thing to approval he seemed to offer. Nora followed the barn cat from room to room and asked Caleb a continuous stream of questions that he answered with the same steady economy as always. On the morning of the 4th day, a rider came through the snow. Clara heard the horse first, heard the change in Caleb's posture before she saw his face, a stiffening in his shoulders as he stood at the window looking out. She came to stand beside him and looked out too. The rider was a man, perhaps 50, heavy set, on a dark horse that was breathing hard from the conditions. Well dressed for a man riding in a blizzard, that was the first thing she noticed. Good coat, good hat, not a working man's clothing. "Are you expecting someone?" Clara asked. "No," Caleb said. One word, and it carried a weight that the word itself didn't explain. "Do you know him?" A pause. "Yes." He went to the door and opened it before the man could knock, which told Clara this was not someone Caleb wanted standing on his porch long enough to choose whether to open the door or not. "Mason," Caleb said. The man called Mason stepped inside and unwound his scarf and looked around the kitchen with the ease of someone accustomed to walking into rooms and taking inventory. His eyes moved to Clara and stopped. "Well," Mason Caldwell said, and he smiled the kind of smile that was built entirely on the outside of a face and had nothing behind it. "You must be the new arrangement." He took off his hat. "Mason Caldwell. I'm an old friend of Caleb's." "Clara Whitmore," Clara said. Mason's smile stayed exactly where it was. He looked at her for 2 seconds longer than a stranger should. "Whitmore," he said. "That's an Ohio name, if I'm not mistaken." "Is it?" Clara said. "I believe I've heard it before somewhere. Can't place it just now." He turned to Caleb. "I got caught in the storm on my way back from Helena. Wondered if I might impose on you for a night." "Roads are bad," Caleb said. "They are. Another day of riding in this, and I'll lose the horse." Mason glanced around the kitchen again with that inventory expression. "Just one night. I won't be any trouble." Caleb looked at him for a long moment, a look that was entirely illegible to Clara, but that clearly communicated something specific to Mason, because Mason's smile adjusted by one small degree, becoming something slightly more careful. "One night," Caleb said. "Guest rooms at the top of the stairs." "Much obliged." Mason set his bag down and looked at Clara. "Something smells wonderful, Mrs. Whitmore." "It's just beans," Clara said pleasantly. That evening at supper, Mason talked the way men talked who were accustomed to filling rooms with themselves. He talked about Helena, about the territorial legislature, about land prices and cattle markets, and the difficulties of winter travel. He was charming in a professional way, the way lawyers were charming, the way men were charming who needed other people to feel comfortable before they got to the point. Clara had known men like Mason Caldwell her entire life. She had been married for 12 years to a man who'd been destroyed by one. She watched him across the supper table, and she smiled at the right moments and said very little. And while she was doing that, she noticed 3 things. First, Mason never looked directly at Caleb when Caleb wasn't watching him, but he watched Caleb carefully when Caleb looked away. Second, his eyes went to the ceiling twice during supper, toward the second floor, in a way that was subtle enough to miss if you weren't already watching for it. Third, when Nora mentioned the locked room at the end of the upstairs hall, the way 7-year-olds mention forbidden things, testing the sound of them, Mason's charming expression didn't flicker at all. It didn't flicker because he already knew about it. Eliza had gone rigid beside Clara at the same moment. Clara put her hand briefly on her daughter's knee under the table. Easy. Not yet. After supper, Caleb and Mason sat in the front room, and Clara washed dishes and listened to their voices through the open doorway. She could not hear specific words, only tone. And the tones were not the tones of old friends catching up. They were careful tones, measured. The tones of 2 people who knew exactly where the edges of the conversation were and were walking along them. She dried the last dish and hung up the cloth and turned to find Eliza standing in the doorway to the back hall, watching the front room with those flat, calculating eyes. "You know him," Eliza said. Not a question. "No," Clara said. "Then why do you look like you do?" Clara pulled Eliza gently into the kitchen and stood close and spoke low. "The man who drew up the debt papers that took our house. The lawyer. Did I ever tell you his name?" Eliza's face went very still. "No." "Caldwell," Clara said. "Mason Caldwell. His office was in Columbus." She watched Eliza absorb that. "I never saw him myself. Daniel handled it. By the time I found out the papers existed, Daniel was already gone, and the bankmen were already at the door." Eliza stared at her. "He followed you here." I don't know that. Mama, he followed you here. Clara was quiet for a moment. I don't know that yet, she said again. And until I know it, we say nothing. We act like nothing has changed. Do you understand me? Eliza looked at the doorway to the front room. She looked back at Clara. She was 13 years old, and she had her father's eyes and her mother's jaw, and in that moment she looked neither young nor old, but simply dangerous in a way that Clara recognized, because she had felt the same thing looking out of her own face for the past 14 months. I understand, Eliza said. They went upstairs. Clara got Nora settled and lay down in the darkness and listened to the house. Mason Caldwell's footsteps went past their door at 10 o'clock, unhurried, going to the guest room at the top of the stairs. Caleb's footsteps came up 20 minutes later, heavier, slower. He stopped in the hall outside their door for just a moment. Not threatening. Something else. Like a man checking on something he couldn't name. Then he moved on. Then, because the night was never quiet in this house, Clara heard it again. Ruth's voice from the end of the hall, low and continuous, the same murmuring rise and fall. But tonight, there was something different underneath it. Tonight, Ruth's voice had a shape to it, a pattern. And Clara lay still and strained to hear until the words finally resolved themselves out of the murmur. She was saying a name, over and over, very quietly, the way you said a name when you were trying to hold on to it, when you were afraid that if you stopped saying it, you might forget it entirely. The name she was saying was Mason. Clara lay in the dark with her eyes open and the blizzard against the walls and her daughters asleep on either side of her, and the name Mason Caldwell sitting in the room like a third presence. And she felt the shape of something large and ugly beginning to come clear, the way shapes came clear in snow when the wind shifted. She didn't have enough pieces yet, but she had enough to know that the man sleeping 20 feet down the hall had not arrived here by accident. He had not been caught in the storm on his way from Helena. He had come here the way he had come to Daniel, with papers and a plan and a smile that lived only on the outside of his face. The question she could not yet answer was why. The question she could not yet answer was what Ruth Hargrove knew about Mason Caldwell that was dangerous enough to lock her behind a bolt and a padlock in an unheated room at the end of a Montana winter hall. Clara closed her eyes. She made herself breathe slowly. She made herself think rather than feel, because feeling right now would cost her something she couldn't afford. She was going to need that key, and she was going to need it before Mason Caldwell found a reason to stop her from ever reaching that door. Mason Caldwell came down to breakfast the next morning looking like a man who had slept well and had no reason not to. He sat at the table and accepted the coffee Clara poured and complimented the biscuits and asked Nora what the barn cat's name was. And he was so thoroughly, professionally pleasant that Clara had to concentrate on keeping her hands steady while she worked at the stove. Caleb sat at his end of the table and said almost nothing. He ate with the focused economy he brought to everything and watched Mason the way a man watched something he had made a decision about but hadn't yet acted on. Clara caught him looking at her once, quickly, and she looked back with nothing on her face, and he looked away first. After breakfast, Caleb went to the barn, and Mason stayed at the table with his second cup of coffee and opened a leather document case he had brought down from his room. He spread papers on the table with the practiced ease of a man who spent most of his life behind papers, and he looked up at Clara as she cleared the dishes. "You keep accounts for Hargrove?" he asked. "I do." "Smart man, hiring someone who can handle books." He turned a page over. "Where did you learn?" "My husband taught me." She stacked the plates without looking at him. He was particular about accounts. "Was," Mason said. Just the one word, with a small, careful pause before it. I'm sorry for your loss, Mrs. Whitmore.
Thank you.
How long ago?
14 months.
Mason made a sympathetic sound. He turned another page. Difficult losing a provider, especially with children. He glanced toward the window where Nora could be seen in the yard throwing snow at the barn cat. You're fortunate to have found a situation.
I am, Clara said.
Montana's a long way from Ohio. She turned and looked at him directly. He was watching her over his papers with that smooth, readable-as-nothing expression.
It is, she said. Fresh start.
He looked back at his papers. Nothing wrong with that. Every person deserves a fresh start. He turned another page. Caldwell is a common enough name, I suppose. You wouldn't happen to know of any family by that name in Columbus. I have associates there. I wouldn't, Clara said, and she carried the plates to the wash basin and put her back to him. And she was grateful for the sound of the water because it gave her something to do with her hands and something to stand behind. She heard him close the document case. She heard him stand. She heard his footsteps move toward the hallway, and then she heard them stop. Interesting house, Mason said, from somewhere behind her. She didn't turn. Lot of history in these walls. A pause. I've been here before, you know, years ago, when Caleb's wife was still alive. Clara turned at that. She couldn't help it. I wasn't aware Mr. Hargrove had been married. Mason's smile was in place, smooth and symmetrical. 8 years ago. Beautiful woman. Very trusting. He picked up his document case. Trusting women don't always fare well out here. The frontier asks something harder than trust. He nodded once, pleasantly, and walked out toward the front room. Clara stood at the wash basin with her hands in the water and let the information settle through her the way cold water settled into cloth, reaching everything. Caleb had been married. The woman in the photograph above the stove. Not his sister at all, or not only his sister. And Ruth was upstairs, saying Mason's name in the dark. And Mason had been here before, years ago, when the wife was still alive. She needed to get to Ruth. Today. Before Mason left and took whatever he knew with him. Or worse. Before he did whatever he had actually come here to do. The opportunity came at 2 p.m. Caleb rode out to check the north fence line, something the new snow had made necessary, and he told Clara he would be gone 2 hours. Mason had been in the front room all morning with his papers, and had asked at noon if he might impose on her hospitality for one more night, given the conditions of the road. Caleb had said yes, with the same tone he used for everything. And Mason had thanked him with the same smile he used for everything. And they had been circling each other all day in a way that made the house feel smaller than it was. The moment Caleb's horse cleared the yard, Mason put on his coat and walked out to the barn. Clara watched him from the kitchen window, watched until he disappeared through the barn door, and then she moved. She went upstairs fast, not running, but close to it, and she went to the linen cupboard first, because she needed to look like she had a reason for being in the hall. But her eyes went straight to the bolt at the end of the corridor. The padlock. The door. She went to it and knocked softly.
Ruth, it's Clara, the woman who spoke to you yesterday. I don't have much time.
The silence on the other side lasted long enough to hurt. Then, closer than she expected, right at the door.
Is he gone?
Caleb is gone. There's another man in the barn. I have maybe 20 minutes.
Mason.
Ruth's voice changed shape when she said it, became something compressed and frightened.
He's here? He came here?
He arrived last night. He says he was caught in the storm. A sound from behind the door that might have been a laugh, stripped of everything that made laughing good.
He was not caught in anything. Mason Caldwell has never been caught in anything by accident in his life. A pause. Did he see you? Yes, he asked about my name. He was careful about it. How careful? Careful enough to make it sound like he wasn't asking. Another pause. Longer. Your name, Ruth said. Your real name. What is it? Clara Whitmore. My husband was Daniel Whitmore of Columbus, Ohio. The silence on the other side of the door went very still, different from the other silences. This one had shape to it. Weight. Daniel Whitmore, Ruth said slowly. You know that name. I know that name. Ruth's voice had dropped to barely above a whisper. Mrs. Whitmore, your husband did not die in an accident. Clara put her hand flat on the door, her palm against the cold wood. She had known it for 14 months in the way you knew things before you could prove them, had built the entire architecture of leaving Ohio and coming here on the foundation of that unproven knowing. But hearing it said plainly in another person's voice made the room tilt slightly. Tell me, Clara said. Mason Caldwell had your husband killed. He forged the debt papers himself. Daniel discovered it, discovered the full extent of what Mason had been doing. And Mason had him killed before he could take the evidence to anyone. Ruth's voice was steady in the way voices were steady when the person speaking had been holding the thing for so long they had worn all the terror smooth. I know this because I was married to Mason Caldwell for 4 years. Clara pressed her forehead against the door. She breathed in, out. She thought of Daniel at the kitchen table in Columbus, going over the accounts with his careful handwriting. And she thought of the bankmen on the porch. And she thought of Eliza eating her sister's food without a word. And she held all of it very still inside her, and did not let it break. How did you end up here? She asked. I ran, after the second man Mason had removed, after I understood what he was. Ruth paused. Caleb is my brother. I came here because I had nowhere else. I told Caleb what Mason had done. I told him everything I knew. A brief silence. Caleb believed me. He has protected me. But protecting me his way means keeping me where Mason cannot reach me and where I cannot reach anyone else. That's why you're locked in. Caleb is afraid that if Mason knows I'm alive and talking, he will find a way to silence me before anything I know can be used. So Caleb keeps me here, keeps me quiet, manages the situation. Her voice thinned slightly on the word manages. He is not a cruel man. He is a frightened one. There is a difference, though it is hard to feel the difference from this side of the door. Clara heard the barn door from across the yard. She straightened. I have to go. He's coming back. Mrs. Whitmore. Urgent. The evidence. I have written everything down. Everything I know about Mason. Every name, every transaction, every man he's paid, and every man he's buried. It's in this room. Caleb doesn't know. I wrote it over 2 months while he was working and hid it inside the mattress seam. A short breath. If anything happens to me, if Mason finds a way, you need to know it exists. I'll come back tonight, Clara said, after they're both asleep. I'll find a way to get the key. The key is on his person, Ruth said. He keeps it on his watch chain. Clara heard Mason's boots on the porch steps. She moved to the linen cupboard, pulled 2 towels, and was walking back toward the stairs with them folded over her arm when Mason came through the front door and looked up the staircase and saw her there. Mrs. Whitmore, he said pleasantly. Mr. Caldwell? She came down the stairs at a normal pace. Thought I heard one of the girls up here, but it was just the wind. Drafty old houses, Mason said. He was looking at her with that expression of his. The one that gave nothing away because there was nothing genuine behind it to give. I find the upper hallway particularly cold. So do I, Clara said, and she went past him into the kitchen and stayed there until her hands stopped shaking. She told Eliza that night after Nora was asleep. She sat beside her daughter on the narrow bed and kept her voice so low it barely disturbed the air. And she told her about Daniel and Mason Caldwell and the forged papers and Ruth behind the locked door, with her 2 months of written evidence hidden inside a mattress. Eliza listened without moving. Her breathing stayed even. This was the terrible gift her daughter had developed in the last 14 months. The ability to receive devastating information without flinching. And Clara hated that Eliza needed it and was grateful for it at the same time. When Clara finished, Eliza was quiet for a long moment. "The key is on his watch chain," Eliza said. "Yes. You can't take it without him knowing. Not while he's awake." Eliza was quiet again. Then, "He takes it off at night. Men who wear watch chains take them off at night. They put them on the nightstand." She looked at Clara in the dark. "The guest room door doesn't lock from the inside. I checked when we arrived. None of the doors up here lock from inside except ours and Caleb's." Clara looked at her daughter. "I'm smaller," Eliza said. "Quieter. I've been moving through this house for 4 days. I know every board that creaks." "No. Mama." "Eliza, no." "Then what? We wait? We let Mason do whatever he came here to do, and then he leaves and takes everything Ruth knows with him, and we go back to having nothing?" Eliza's voice was low, but it had an edge to it sharp enough to cut. "Papa is dead because of that man. He sat at our table tonight and asked you questions about Columbus, and smiled, and you smiled back. And Papa is in the ground in Ohio because of him." Clara put her arms around her daughter and held her, and Eliza went rigid for a moment, the way she always did when someone tried to hold her now. And then she let go of whatever was holding her rigid and pressed her face against Clara's shoulder and breathed. They stayed like that for a while. "Not you," Clara said finally. "I'll go." "Mama." "I'll go. You stay here with your sister. If you hear anything at all, you take Nora, you go downstairs, and you go to the barn and you saddle the gray horse. You don't wait for me. Do you understand?" "I'm not leaving without you." "Eliza, I am not leaving without you." Clara pulled back and looked at her daughter's face in the dark. 13 years old. Her father's eyes. "Stay with your sister," Clara said. "I'll be back in 20 minutes." She waited until 1 in the morning. She lay still and tracked the sounds of the house until they told her what she needed. Nora breathing deep. Eliza's wakeful quiet. Caleb's heavy footsteps going still an hour ago. The front room lamp extinguished. Mason's door closed at 11:30. The blizzard had died down slightly, and the house had settled into its winter silence. The particular kind of silence that very cold places had, where the quiet itself seemed to have weight. Clara got up. She did not take the lamp. She moved in complete darkness, feeling the floor with her feet, avoiding the third board from the left at the top of the stairs because it announced itself. She had been memorizing this house for 4 days, and now she let the memory work. The guest room was the second door on the right. She stood outside it for 30 seconds and listened. Nothing but slow, even breathing. She turned the handle by increments and pushed the door open by 3 inches and waited. The breathing did not change. She pushed it another 3 inches. The room was dark, but there was faint moonlight coming through the curtain gap, enough to find shapes. The bed, the nightstand, the document case on the chair. She moved to the nightstand and looked down, and there it was, the watch and chain, coiled in a loose circle on the wood,
the key hanging from it like a small dark tooth. She reached for it. I wondered how long it would take. Clara did not run. She did not make a sound. She straightened and turned slowly, and Mason was sitting up in the bed, watching her, with an expression she could finally read, because he was no longer trying to hide it. It was the expression of a man who had been expecting exactly this and was pleased to have been proved right. "The key," he said pleasantly. "Were you planning to go upstairs with it?" Clara said nothing. She stood between the door and the nightstand and made herself think. "I know about Ruth," Mason said. He swung his legs off the bed and sat on the edge of it, unhurried. "I've known she was here for 8 months. I've been patient about it, waiting to understand what she might have told Caleb, whether Caleb had done anything with what she told him." He picked up the watch chain from the nightstand beside him, on his side where she hadn't seen it, and the key swung from it in the dim light. He had moved it. He had known. "I needed to see what she had." "The documents," Clara said. "Yes." He stood. "A woman who was my wife for 4 years would have had access to a great deal of information. I need to know how much of it she wrote down and where it is." He looked at Clara with that smooth, empty smile. "And now you are going to help me find it." "I'm not," Clara said. "Mrs. Whitmore." His voice was still pleasant, entirely, smoothly pleasant, the way it had been at breakfast and supper and every moment in between. And the pleasantness of it was the most frightening thing in the room. "Your husband's death was unfortunate. A loose end I handled earlier than I would have preferred. You were never supposed to be involved. But you're here now, and you've put yourself in the middle of something that is considerably larger than a locked room in a Montana ranch house." He took one step toward her. "Help me find what Ruth wrote down, and I walk away. You stay here. Your girls stay here. No one asks any more questions about Daniel Whitmore." Clara looked at the key on his watch chain. She looked at the door behind her, 3 inches open, the dark hallway beyond it. She thought about Ruth on the other side of a bolted door with 2 months of evidence sewn into a mattress. She thought about Eliza sitting in the dark with Nora pressed against her side, waiting. She thought about Daniel at the kitchen table in Columbus, bending over the accounts with his careful handwriting, not yet knowing what was coming for him. "No," Clara said. Mason stopped smiling, and from the hallway behind her, from just beyond the 3-inch gap of the open door, came a sound she had not expected. Low and certain as a hammer pulled back on a cold morning. Caleb Hargrove's voice. "Step away from her, Mason. Right now." Mason did not step back immediately. He was not a man who responded to instructions reflexively. Clara had already understood that about him. He took his time, measured the situation, calculated his options in the space of 2 seconds. And then he stepped back 1 pace and held both hands slightly away from his sides in a gesture that was surrender-shaped without being surrender. Caleb came through the door. He had his revolver in his right hand and his eyes on Mason, and his body positioned between Mason and Clara, with a deliberateness that told her he had not arrived 30 seconds ago. He had been standing in that hallway longer than that, long enough to hear most of what had been said. "The watch chain," Caleb said to Mason. "Put it on the nightstand." "Caleb," Mason's voice had changed. The pleasantness was still there, but it had thinned, and underneath it was something older and harder. "Let's not be dramatic about this. I came here in good faith. You came here because you found out Ruth was alive." Caleb's voice was the same as always, even and low, but there was something underneath it tonight that Clara had not heard before. Something that had been held down for a long time and was no longer entirely held. "You've known for 8 months, and you waited to see whether I'd already done something with what she told me? When I didn't, you came to clean it up yourself." He took one more step into the room. Watch chain, nightstand. Now.
Mason set the watch chain on the nightstand, with the measured movement of a man conserving his options. The key clinked against the wood. "You're making a mistake," Mason said. "Ruth is not a reliable witness.
She was unstable when she was my wife, and she's been locked in a room for the better part of a year, which is not going to make her more credible to any judge or jury in the territory." "I'm not talking about courts right now," Caleb said. "Right now I'm talking about you, in my house, threatening a woman and her children." He glanced at Clara for 1 second. "Go upstairs. Take the key." Clara picked up the watch chain. Her hand was steady. She was grateful for that. "Your girls first," Caleb said, still watching Mason. "Wake them. Bring them down to the kitchen. Stay there until I come down." Clara went into the hall and up the stairs, and pushed open the door to their room, and found Eliza standing exactly where she had left her. Upright, coat already on. Nora held against her side with one arm. Both of them awake and waiting. "Coat," Eliza said to Clara before Clara could speak. "Put your coat on." Clara put her coat on. She took Nora's hand, and Eliza took her other side, and they went downstairs to the kitchen. And Clara put Nora on the chair by the stove, and stirred the coals, and added wood. And the three of them sat in the warmth, and listened to the sounds from above. Voices. Caleb's, steady. Mason's, at first even, and then not. A sharp sound that might have been a fist on a wall. Then Caleb's voice again, lower. And then footsteps, heavy, coming toward the door. Nora pressed against Clara's side. "Mama, what's happening?" "It's all right, sweetheart." "Is the man angry?" "He doesn't get to be angry in this house," Eliza said, and her voice was so flat and certain that Nora accepted it and leaned her head against Clara's arm and was quiet. Caleb came downstairs alone. He crossed to the stove and poured coffee, and stood with his back to them for a moment, the way he stood when he was deciding something. Then he turned around and sat at the table and looked at Clara. "He's in his room," Caleb said. "I've put a chair under his door handle from the outside. He's not going anywhere tonight." He set the revolver on the table with a deliberate movement, not a threat, just setting it down. "Come morning, I'll ride to town and get the sheriff. The roads are bad, but passable if you go careful." "The documents Ruth wrote," Clara said. "You knew about them?" A pause. "I knew she'd been writing. I didn't know how much or where she'd put it. I didn't ask because I didn't want to know, because knowing would have meant deciding what to do with it, and I wasn't ready to decide." He looked at his coffee cup. "I have been not ready to decide for 8 months. You knew what Mason did to Daniel Whitmore?" Caleb looked up. "Ruth told me a man in Ohio. She didn't give me the name. I didn't connect it to you when you arrived because I wasn't looking for a connection." He was quiet for a moment. "I am sorry, Mrs. Whitmore. If I had moved sooner, if I had taken what Ruth knew to the right people 8 months ago, instead of keeping her here and waiting, your husband would still be—" He stopped. "I'm sorry," he said again. Clara absorbed that. She sat with it for a moment, the weight of it, and then she set it aside because there was no useful place to put it right now. "We need to get Ruth out of that room," she said. "Yes. Tonight, not tomorrow. Tonight." She held up the watch chain and key. "Mason knows she's here. He knows about the documents. Even with a chair under his door, I am not comfortable leaving her up there until morning." Caleb looked at the key. Something moved through his face, something that had been a long time coming and hadn't found its way out yet. He nodded. They went upstairs together, all 5 of them, because Clara was not leaving her daughters alone in the kitchen with Mason Caldwell 1 floor above them, chair or no chair. Caleb drew the bolt and used the key on the padlock and unwound the chain, and the door swung open inward. Ruth Hargrove was sitting on the edge of the bed. She had heard them coming, and she was upright, a thin blanket around her shoulders, her hair loose, her face turned toward the door with an expression that had been calibrated over a long time to expect disappointment. When she saw Caleb, she said nothing. When she saw Clara, she said nothing. When she saw Eliza and Nora standing in the hallway, she made a small sound that was not a word. "Ruth," Caleb said. His voice had changed. The control was still there, but something under it had cracked open slightly. Not much, just enough to change the sound of it. "I'm sorry. I should have done this sooner." Ruth looked at him for a long moment. "Yes," she said. "You should have." She stood, and the blanket fell away, and she was thinner than Clara had expected, and steadier than Clara had expected at the same time. She looked at Clara. "You got the key. I got the key. Mason? Caleb has him secured for the night." Ruth closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, they were clear. "The mattress," she said to Clara. "Help me with the mattress." They pulled it off the bed frame together, and Ruth ran her hands along the seam at the bottom edge and found what she was looking for by touch. A section where the stitching was different, tighter, her own work. She pulled a small knife from her coat pocket and cut the seam, and reached inside and came out with a folded oilcloth packet, thick with paper. She held it out to Clara. "Why me?" Clara said. "Because he came here for you too," Ruth said. "Because your husband's name is in there. Because you have more reason to make sure it reaches the right hands than anyone else in this room." She pressed the packet into Clara's hands. "And because you came back. I asked you to come back, and you came back." Clara took the packet and held it. Nora had been very quiet since they came upstairs, which was unusual enough that Clara had been tracking it with part of her attention. Now Nora stepped forward from behind Eliza's arm and looked up at Ruth with her clear, 7-year-old eyes. "You've been up here the whole time we were here?" she said. "Yes," Ruth said. "Were you scared?" Ruth looked down at her. "Yes," she said. "I was." "We're not scared," Nora said. It was not bravado. It was simply a report of fact, as she understood it. "Mama fixes things." She looked at Clara. "She always fixes things." Clara felt something shift in her chest that she was not going to examine until she was somewhere private. "Come on," she said. "All of you downstairs." They settled Ruth at the kitchen table with blankets and food and coffee, and Ruth ate with the concentrated attention of someone who had been getting barely enough for a long time. She was 40 years older, by some measure, than the woman she would have been without the last 8 months. But she was present, she was functional, and she was angry in the clean, controlled way that people were angry when they had decided what to do with it. Caleb sat across from her, and they did not speak much, but they looked at each other with a particular expression of siblings who have been on opposite sides of a decision and have arrived, too late and the wrong way, at the same place. At some point near 3 in the morning, Nora fell asleep against Clara's arm at the table, and Eliza put her head down on her folded arms and was asleep within 2 minutes, the deepest sleep Clara had seen from her in months. Clara sat between her daughters with the oilcloth packet on the table in front of her, and watched the lamp and thought. Caleb refilled her coffee without being asked. "You'll want to read it," he said quietly, nodding at the packet, "before the sheriff comes. You'll want to understand what's in it." "Yes. I can take the girls somewhere more comfortable if you—" "No." She put her hand briefly on Nora's hair. "They stay where I can see them." Caleb sat back down. "All right." Clara untied the oilcloth and opened the packet carefully. Ruth's handwriting was small and precise, the handwriting of someone who had learned to make the most of whatever paper she had available. Names, dates, transactions. 4 years of a marriage spent watching a man operate and remembering everything she saw. The first 20 pages were about Mason's business dealings in Helena.
The land acquisitions, the shell companies, the judges who had accepted payments, and the men who had disappeared when they proved inconvenient. And then, 12 pages in, Daniel Whitmore's name. Clara read that section twice.
She read it with her hand resting on Nora's sleeping head, and her jaw set, and her eyes moving over Ruth's small, precise words, and she absorbed every sentence, the way you absorbed a thing that confirmed what you already knew. It did not make it easier. Confirmation never made it easier. But it made it real in a different way, made it solid and usable, rather than just the ache she had been carrying for 14 months without anywhere to put it. Daniel had discovered the discrepancy in the land title records. He had gone to Mason's office to raise the question, had been given a smooth explanation, had accepted it and gone home, and then had apparently continued thinking about it, because 6 weeks later he had gone back with specific questions that Mason had not been able to answer smoothly. Ruth had been in the next room. She had written down what she heard. 2 weeks after that second meeting, Daniel Whitmore had been dead in a mine collapse that Ruth wrote was not a collapse. Clara folded those pages carefully and set them aside and kept reading. Ruth's hand on her arm. Quiet. Clara looked up. "I'm sorry about your husband," Ruth said. "He was asking the right questions. He just asked them to the wrong man." "He didn't know," Clara said. "No one knew. That's how Mason built it." Ruth's voice was steady. "He built it to look like nothing. A man like Mason, the reason he survives this long is that he only ever does one thing at a time, and he waits between each one long enough for people to stop looking." She looked at her hands. "I was married to him for 4 years before I understood what he was. And even then it took me another year to leave because I kept telling myself I had misread it." "You hadn't misread it." "No." Ruth looked at Clara directly. "Neither did you." From upstairs the sound of movement. A door, or what would have been a door, if a door had not had a chair braced under its handle. A handle being tried. Tried again. Then silence. Caleb stood. "Sit down," Clara said. He looked at her. "He knows he can't get out," Clara said. "He's testing it. He'll accept it and think." She looked at the oilcloth packet. "Right now what he's doing is deciding how to manage this in the morning, how to present it, what his angle is. He'll come down for breakfast with a new story, and he'll be pleasant about it, and he'll try to find the weak point." Caleb sat down slowly. "And what do we do with that?" "We let him try," Clara said. "And we make sure that before the sheriff arrives, he doesn't know what we have, and doesn't know how much we know." She looked at Ruth. "Is there anything in here that Mason could argue against? Any part of it that's your word against his, without supporting evidence?" Ruth thought. "The payments to Judge Harlan are documented, with receipts I copied before I left. The land transfers are all a matter of public record that can be checked against what I've written. The account of your husband," she paused, "that is my account of what I heard. It will carry weight in combination with everything else, but alone it is my word." "It won't be alone," Clara said. Ruth looked at her. "What else is there?" "The debt papers," Clara said. "The originals, with Daniel's signature. I kept them. I've had them in the bottom of my carpet bag for 14 months because something told me not to destroy them." She looked at Caleb. "I need something to compare the signature against, something I know is genuinely Daniel's hand." "Why?" Caleb said. "Because the signature on those papers is not his. I knew it when I first saw it, and I couldn't prove it, and I had no one to bring it to. But if I can demonstrate that the signature is forged, that the papers are fraudulent, then the question of who forged them leads directly to Mason. And Ruth's account of what she heard in that office 8 months later becomes corroboration, not the sole evidence." She looked at Caleb steadily. "I need a handwriting expert, and I need a county recorder who isn't on Mason Caldwell's payroll.
Does the sheriff in Millhaven fit that description? Caleb was quiet for a moment. Tom Aldridge has been sheriff in Millhaven for 11 years, he said. He is not a complicated man, but he is a straight one. Mason has never had business in Millhaven that I know of. The county recorder is Aldridge's wife's brother. He paused. Probably about as clean a situation as you'll find in this territory. Then that's enough to start, Clara said. She began organizing the papers, the oilcloth packet, Ruth's pages in sequence, the folded section she had set aside. We need copies of the most critical pages before morning. In case Mason finds a way to get to this. She looked at Caleb. Do you have paper? Writing desk in the front room, Caleb said. He stood, and then he stopped and looked at her across the kitchen table with an expression she had not seen on him before. Something that was not quite surprise and not quite respect, but was close to both. Mrs. Whitmore, he said. Mr. Hargrove? You have been in this house for 4 days. I have. He was quiet for a moment. My letter said one woman, he said, and there was something in his voice that was the closest thing to dry humor she had heard from him. It did, Clara said. It turns out you needed 3. Something crossed his face that was finally, actually, a smile. Small and gone almost immediately, but real. He went to get the paper. Ruth looked at Clara. For the first time since the door had opened, something in Ruth's face was lighter than it had been. He hasn't smiled in a long time, she said quietly. Not since Eleanor died. His wife? Yes. Ruth wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. She was good for him. Made him softer in the right places. She looked at the doorway Caleb had gone through. Losing her made him too careful, too controlled. He thought if he held everything tight enough, nothing else could fall. Clara looked at her daughters, Eliza asleep with her face turned to one side, Nora still pressed against Clara's arm even in sleep, one small hand curled around Clara's wrist. He held the wrong things, Clara said quietly. Yes, Ruth said, he did. She looked at Clara. But he held the door open when you knocked. He set 4 plates before you arrived. She looked down at her coffee. He hasn't set 4 plates for anything in 3 years. Clara said nothing to that. She untied the remaining section of the oilcloth and smoothed the pages flat, and picked up the pen Caleb had brought back with the paper, and she began to copy. Her handwriting was clear and quick, Daniel's teaching still in her hand after all this time, and she worked in the quiet of the kitchen while her daughters slept, and Ruth sat across from her, and the blizzard pressed softly against the walls, and somewhere upstairs, Mason Caldwell paced whatever square of floor was available to him, and thought his careful thoughts, and planned his morning, not yet knowing what was already done. Clara wrote until her hand ached. She wrote until she had copied everything that mattered. She folded the copies and wrapped them in a separate piece of oilcloth and handed them to Ruth and kept the originals herself. And then she sat back and looked at what they had. It was enough. She thought it was enough. She had spent 14 months learning to be honest about what she didn't know, and she didn't know yet whether Tom Aldridge of Millhaven was as straight as Caleb believed, or whether the forged signature on Daniel's papers would hold up under the scrutiny she needed it to, or whether Ruth's testimony would be believed against the testimony of a man with Mason Caldwell's resources and reputation. She didn't know any of that, but she had the evidence. She had the oilcloth. She had Ruth alive and speaking and angry in exactly the right, clean way. She had the documents from her own carpetbag that she had carried across half a continent on nothing more than a widow's instinct that the truth was in them somewhere, if she could only find the right place to stand. And she had Caleb Hargrove at the writing desk, making a 3rd copy of the most critical pages on his own initiative, without being asked. his careful handwriting moving steadily across the paper in the lamplight. She had not come to Montana looking for anyone to stand beside her. She had come here to survive, to put her girls somewhere safe while she figured out the next step. She had not imagined the next step would look like this. She had not imagined any of this. But she had knocked on the door, and it had opened. And now she was sitting in a warm kitchen with her daughters asleep on either side of her, and a woman she had not known 4 days ago sitting across from her, and a man copying documents in the next room. And somewhere in the bottom of her carpet bag were papers with a forged signature that were about to become the most important thing Mason Caldwell had ever made the mistake of creating. Nora stirred against her arm, half asleep, not quite waking. "Mama," she murmured, "are we all right?" Clara put her arm around her daughter and held her close. "Yes, sweetheart," she said. "We're all right." Nora sighed and settled back into sleep. Outside, the blizzard had finally stopped. For the first time in 4 days, the wind was quiet, and the silence it left behind was not the silence of something pressing in, but the silence of something that had finally passed. Through the kitchen window, the sky was beginning to lighten at its edges, the first gray suggestion of a dawn that had not yet arrived but was coming. Clara sat in the warm kitchen and watched it come, and waited for morning. Dawn came in slow and pale over the Montana mountains, the kind of winter light that had no warmth in it, but was honest about that fact, which Clara had come to appreciate. She had been awake for the entirety of the night, and she felt it in her bones. But there was a particular clarity that came with that kind of exhaustion, a stripping away of everything that wasn't essential. And right now, essential was the only thing she had time for. Caleb came back from the writing desk at 5:30, with the third copy folded and sealed. He handed it to Clara without comment, and she put it in her coat pocket, separate from the originals in the oilcloth. Ruth had the second copy tucked inside her dress. 3 different locations, 3 different people. Even if Mason somehow got to one of them, he could not get to all 3. "I'll ride to Millhaven at first light," Caleb said. He poured himself coffee and stood at the window looking out at the stopped blizzard and the lightening sky. 4 hours there and back if the roads are passable. Aldridge will come out same day if I tell him what I'm bringing him." "I'll go with you," Clara said. Caleb turned to look at her. "Ruth stays here with the girls," Clara said. "Eliza can manage for a few hours, and Ruth is steadier than she looks. I need to be the one who speaks to Aldridge about Daniel. Ruth can speak to what she witnessed, but the forged papers are mine to present." She looked at him directly. "I have been the one with those papers for 14 months, Mr. Hargrove. I carried them across half this country on nothing but instinct. I am not handing them to someone else to present at the final step." Caleb looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded once. "We leave at 6, he said. "Dress warm." Eliza woke at 5:45, as if she had an internal mechanism for exactly this kind of morning. She came downstairs and took in the situation, took in her mother's coat and the saddled horses visible through the window, and Ruth sitting at the table with the careful stillness of someone who had recently been given back control of her own circumstances. And she said nothing for a moment. Then she went to Clara and stood close. "How long?" she asked. 4 hours, maybe 5. "We'll be fine." "I know you will." Clara put both hands on her daughter's face briefly, the way she had when Eliza was small and needed to know she was seen. "Ruth is here. You know where the rifle is. You know what to do if anyone comes near that door upstairs."
"He won't get out," Eliza said flatly. "I checked the chair myself at 3 in the morning." Clara almost smiled. "Of course you did." "Mama!" Eliza caught her wrist as she turned. "Bring him back. The sheriff. Bring him back today." Her voice was 13 years old and 40 years old at the same time. "Don't let Mason talk his way into another tomorrow." "I won't," Clara said. Nora woke just as Clara was going out the door and called from the top of the stairs, her hair wild, her face creased with sleep. "Where are you going?" "To town." "Can I come?" "Not today, sweetheart. You stay with Eliza and Mrs. Hargrove." Nora considered this. "Is Mrs. Hargrove the lady from the locked room?" "Yes." "Good," Nora said, with the decisive satisfaction of someone whose understanding of justice was still beautifully simple. "She should be out of there." She disappeared back into the bedroom. Clara went out into the cold. The road to Millhaven was bad, but not impassable. The horses broke through the surface crust of the new snow with the steady labor of animals that knew this terrain and accepted it without drama. Clara rode beside Caleb, and they did not speak much for the first 2 miles, which was its own kind of ease, the ease of not needing to fill space with words. It was Caleb who spoke first. "You said last night that you've had those papers for 14 months. "Yes." "And you came here without knowing Ruth was here, without knowing any of it." "I came here because I had nothing left in Ohio, and I needed somewhere to put my girls." She kept her eyes on the road. "I answered your advertisement because the terms were practical, and you sounded like a man who kept his word. That was the full extent of my reasoning." Caleb was quiet for a moment. "And now?" "And now I'm riding to Millhaven in a Montana winter with forged documents in my pocket to put a man in front of a sheriff." She looked at him sideways. "My reasoning has expanded somewhat." Something crossed his face. That almost smile again, more present than it had been before. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, "I want to say something, and I would like you to let me finish it before you respond." "All right." "When I placed that advertisement, I was looking for someone to run the house and keep the accounts and make it possible for this ranch to function. That was all I was looking for. I was not looking for anything else, and I want to be clear that I am not asking for anything else." He paused. "But I am aware that what happened in that house over the last 4 days is not a thing that happens between people who are simply an employer and an employee. And I want to be honest about that because I have found that dishonesty about straightforward things tends to complicate the things that actually matter." Clara looked at him. The horses moved steadily through the snow. "You are an honest man," she said. "I try to be." "You locked your sister in a room for 8 months." "Yes." No defense in it, no explanation, just the word, carrying its full weight. "I did. I told myself it was protection, and it was, partly. But partly, it was easier than deciding. Easier than moving forward into something that frightened me." He looked at the road ahead. "I have been choosing easier for 3 years, since Eleanor died. It has cost me more than I understood at the time." Clara thought about that. She thought about the 4th cup and the food made for 4, and the way he had answered Nora's questions with the patient brevity of a man who had wanted to be asked those questions for a long time and hadn't been. "The contract runs 2 years, Clara said. "It does. I am not in the habit of breaking contracts." "Neither am I." "Then we have 2 years to figure out what honest looks like from here," Clara said. "And I think that's enough time if we're both paying attention." Caleb looked at her. The almost smile arrived and stayed for longer than it had before. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "I reckon it is." They rode the rest of the way to Millhaven in a comfortable quiet. Sheriff Tom Aldridge was a compact, weathered man in his late 50s who looked like he had heard most things and was not easily moved by the rest. He listened to Clara for 40 minutes without interrupting, which told her more about him than any reference could have.
He read Ruth's pages slowly and carefully. He examined the debt papers Clara spread on his desk, and he got out his own glass and looked at the signature for a long time without speaking. Then he looked up at Clara. "You've been carrying these for 14 months. "Yes." "Why didn't you take them to the law in Ohio?" "Because the law in Ohio was the question I couldn't answer," Clara said. "I didn't know who Mason Caldwell had in his pocket and who he didn't. I had no money, no connections, and 2 daughters.
Moving was the only safe option until I could find a place to stand." Aldridge looked at the signature again. He looked at the pages from Ruth. He looked at Caleb. "You've known about this for 8 months," he said to Caleb. "I've known what Ruth told me. I didn't have the documents until last night." "You kept her locked in a room." Caleb held the sheriff's gaze. "Yes," he said, the same way he had said it to Clara on the road. Just the word. "I did." Aldridge was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood up and took his coat off the hook. "My deputy's in Helena for the week," he said. "So the 2 of you are going to ride back out there with me, and we're going to do this properly." He looked at Clara. "You said there were children at the house." "My daughters. 2 girls, 13 and 7. "They all right?" "They're Whitmore women," Clara said. "They're fine." Aldridge almost smiled at that. "Let's go," he said. They made it back to the ranch by noon. Clara saw the house from the road and saw the kitchen window with both her daughters' faces in it. Eliza's pale and watchful, and Nora's nose pressed flat against the glass. And she felt the thing in her chest that had no name loosen by 1 degree. Eliza had the door open before they reached the porch. She looked at Aldridge, at his badge, at his face, and she made the calculation in about 2 seconds. "He's upstairs," she said. "Chair still in place. He tried the handle twice around 8 o'clock and then stopped." Aldridge looked at her. "How old are you?" 13. "You want to be a deputy when you grow up?" "I want to be a lawyer," Eliza said, "so I can do this part legally." Aldridge looked at Caleb. Caleb said nothing, but his expression said something. Aldridge went inside. Ruth was at the kitchen table, and she stood when Aldridge came in, and she looked at him with a particular expression of a woman who had rehearsed this moment many times in a cold room over many months, and was now adjusting to the reality of it being actual. Aldridge took off his hat. He pulled out a chair across from her. "Mrs. Caldwell," he said. "Hargrove," Ruth said. "I have been Ruth Hargrove since I left that man." "Mrs. Hargrove." Aldridge sat. "I've read what you wrote. I'd like to hear it from you directly." He looked at Clara and Caleb. "Give us some time." Clara took the girls to the front room. Caleb went to check the animals. Through the wall, Clara could hear the murmur of voices, Ruth's steady and continuous, Aldridge's occasional and brief. Nora sat beside Clara and leaned against her arm, and asked in a low voice whether everything was going to be all right now, and Clara said yes, and meant it in a way she had not been able to mean it for 14 months. Eliza sat across from them and looked at her hands. "He killed Papa on purpose," she said. It was not a question. "Yes," Clara said. She had decided on the ride back that she would not protect Eliza from this. Eliza had not been protected from any of the rest of it, and she had earned the full truth. "Mason Caldwell had your father killed because your father found evidence of what he was doing and went to ask him about it directly." She held her daughter's gaze. "Your father was honest. He believed that if he asked the question plainly, he'd get a plain answer. That was who he was." Eliza was quiet. Her jaw worked for a moment. "He was too good for what happened to him," she said finally. "Yes," Clara said. "He was." "Is that enough?" Eliza asked. "Being good? Is that actually enough in the world?" Clara thought about Daniel. She thought about Ruth in a cold room for 8 months,
because being good hadn't protected her either.
She thought about the oilcloth packet and the forged signature, and the 40 minutes she had spent in Aldridge's office, putting one true thing after another on his desk, until the shape of the truth was undeniable. "It's enough when you combine it with evidence," Clara said. "Goodness alone isn't enough, but goodness with documentation, and a straight sheriff, and a room full of people willing to say what they know. That's a different proposition." Eliza looked at her. Something in her face shifted, something that had been locked in the position of grief, and moved now into something slightly more useful. "You planned all of that," she said. "Last night. You planned all of it." "I organized what we had," Clara said. "That's all I did. Your father already put the most important piece in motion. He went back a second time. He asked the question that frightened Mason into acting. The evidence existed because Daniel looked for it." She held her daughter's gaze. "We finished what he started." Eliza was quiet for a long moment. Then she nodded, one decisive movement, and looked at the wall as if she was filing something important away in a place where she could find it later. Aldridge came out of the kitchen at 1:30. He looked at Clara. "I'm going upstairs," he said. "I'd appreciate it if everyone stayed down here." "Understood," Clara said. They heard his boots on the stairs. They heard him move down the hall. They heard the scrape of the chair being removed from the door handle. They heard the door open. What followed was not dramatic in the way that things were dramatic in stories. There was no shouting, no struggle, no crash of furniture. There was the low sound of Aldridge's voice, and then Mason Caldwell's voice, at first even and explanatory, and then, after a few minutes, something else, something that had lost its professional pleasantness and was trying to find the angle and not finding it. Nora had her ear pressed to the underside of the staircase banister. "He sounds different now," she said. "He sounds like what he is," Eliza said. They came downstairs 20 minutes later, Aldridge with his hand on Mason's arm, and Mason with his document case and his good coat, and his face that had rearranged itself into something Clara had not seen on it before. Not pleasantness, and not anger, but something thinner and more frightened underneath. He saw Clara standing in the front room doorway, and he stopped for 1 second, just one, and looked at her with an expression that she understood was the first genuine thing she had ever seen from him. He had not expected her to be the one. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said. Clara said nothing. She looked at him steadily and let the silence do what silence did. Aldridge moved him toward the door. At the threshold, Mason turned once more and looked at Caleb. "This isn't finished," he said. The pleasantness was entirely gone, and what was left was the cold calculation he had kept under it for 20 years. Visible now, because he had nothing left to cover it with. "I have resources you haven't. You have a court date," Aldridge said, and moved him out the door. Clara listened to the horses leave the yard. She stood in the doorway and listened until the sound of hoofbeats was gone, and there was only the quiet of the snow and the cold and the wide Montana sky. Ruth came to stand beside her. She stood in the open doorway of a house she had not been permitted to leave for 8 months, and she breathed the outside air in slowly and let it out, and breathed it in again. She didn't say anything. Clara didn't say anything. They stood there together in the cold and let it be what it was. Caleb came around the side of the house from the barn and saw them in the doorway and stopped. He looked at his sister standing in the open air for the first time since the previous winter, and something crossed his face that was not the almost smile and was not the controlled neutrality. It was older than both of those things and more real than either, and he stood with it for a moment before he crossed the yard and came to the porch.
He stood at the bottom of the steps and looked up at Ruth. "I'm sorry," he said. Just those 2 words, without decoration or excuse. Ruth looked at her brother for a long moment. "You kept me alive," she said. "You were wrong about the method, but you kept me alive." She held his gaze. "We have things to talk about, Caleb. Many things. But not today." "No," he said. "Not today." Nora pushed past Clara's legs and went down the porch steps and stood in front of Caleb, looking up at him with her clear 7-year-old eyes. "Is the bad man gone?" she asked. "He's gone," Caleb said.
Is he going to come back?
"No," Caleb said, and he said it with a certainty that was not bravado, but was simply the word of a man who had stopped hedging and was prepared to stand behind what he said. "He is not coming back." Nora nodded. She looked around the yard, at the snow covering everything in the clean, indifferent white of a Montana winter. At the mountains beyond the fence line, standing against the sky with the patience of things that had been there long before any of this trouble, and would be there long after. She looked satisfied, the particular satisfaction of a child who has understood that the adults have finally sorted things out, and the world is functioning as it should. "Good," she said. She went back up the porch steps and went inside, presumably to find the barn cat. Clara looked at Caleb. He was looking at the space Nora had just vacated, and on his face was the expression she had first seen when Nora had asked him whether he'd wanted children, and he had said yes, and turned back to the dishes. The same expression, but more open now, less sealed over. "The contract runs 2 years, he said. "We established that this morning," Clara said. "I want to amend it." She raised an eyebrow. "Article 7 is void," he said. "Effective now. There are no locked rooms in this house anymore, and there will not be." He looked up at her. "Everything else stands." "Everything else stands," Clara agreed. Eliza had come to stand beside Clara, and she looked at Caleb with those calculating eyes, and whatever calculation she was running appeared to resolve itself, because she gave a single small nod and went back inside without comment. It was the closest thing to approval Eliza offered anyone, and Clara suspected Caleb understood exactly what it was. That evening they ate supper, 5 at the table. Ruth sat in a chair at the table's end, in the place that was neither Caleb's end nor the far end, a middle place that was hers, and she ate slowly and with attention, and looked around the kitchen once with an expression of a woman reclaiming something she had earned by surviving. Nora asked her whether she was good at cards because the barn cat had knocked the deck off the shelf and scattered them, and Nora needed someone to help pick them up and play a game. Ruth said she was reasonably good at cards. Nora said good and climbed off her chair. Caleb washed the dishes and Clara dried them, standing side by side at the basin, the way she had stood alone for 4 days. And the difference in the sound of the kitchen with another person there was something she had stopped letting herself notice and was allowing herself to notice again. "The case will go to trial in Helena," Caleb said. "You'll need to be there, both you and Ruth." "I know. It'll take months. Spring at the earliest." "I know that too." He handed her a plate, and she dried it and set it on the shelf. "The roads will open in March," he said. "We'll need to plant the north field by April if the season's going to hold." "Then we plant the north field in April," Clara said. He handed her another plate. "You know anything about planting?" "I know how to learn," Clara said. "And I know how to keep accounts, and I know how to manage a difficult situation. And I know that your corn yield is 12% lower than it ought to be based on the acreage you're working, because you've been undermanning the harvest rotation." She looked at him sideways. "I read the ledgers." Caleb stopped washing for just a moment. Then he resumed. "Of course you did," he said. "I can show you where it's coming from." "I reckon you can," he said, and there was something in his voice that was warm, in the particular way of a man who had been alone for 3 years and had stopped expecting anything different and was finding, slowly, that different had arrived when he wasn't looking. Later, after the girls were in bed and Ruth had gone to her room, the real room now, the one with a functioning coal stove and no bolt on the outside, Clara sat at the kitchen table alone for a while. She put the oilcloth packet on the table in front of her, and she opened it, and she took out the pages with Daniel's name on them, and she read them one more time. She read them the way you read something you needed to finish with, the way you read a letter to the end so you could fold it and put it down.
She read every word, and she held Daniel in her mind while she read. Daniel, at the kitchen table with his careful handwriting. Daniel asking the question that needed asking because he was too honest not to. Daniel who had been too good for what happened to him. She folded the pages and held them in her hands for a moment. Then she stood and went to the stove and opened the grate and put the pages in. She watched them catch and burn and curl and go. The evidence was in Ruth's hands and Aldridge's hands, and in the certified copies already prepared for the court. She did not need these pages anymore. She did not need to carry them. She had carried them for 14 months across half a continent, through grief and displacement and the long grinding work of surviving. And they had done what she needed them to do. They had brought her here. They had given her a place to stand. She closed the grate and stood at the stove and felt the heat of it against her palms, and she thought that Daniel would have understood this, would have understood that the carrying was over and the building was the next thing. Would have approved, she thought, of Eliza with her calculating eyes and her plans to be a lawyer. Would have understood Nora walking up to strangers and asking them plain questions that needed asking. Would have understood Clara standing in a kitchen in Montana in the dead of winter, not running anymore, with 2 daughters asleep upstairs and a man in the next room, who kept his word and set 4 plates before anyone arrived to fill them. The fire in the stove settled and breathed. Outside, the Montana night was enormous and cold and entirely still, the blizzard long gone, the stars thrown across the black sky like something spilled and permanent. The house around her was warm and quiet and alive with the particular quality of a place that had stopped being only a structure and had started being something people came back to. Clara Whitmore had come west to disappear into safety. Instead, she had walked into the center of something, had stood in the middle of it without flinching, had used everything she had and found it was enough. She was not the woman who had stood on a train platform in Millhaven with a carpet bag and nowhere left to go. She was not that woman anymore. She was the woman who had gotten the key